June 22, 1944. 0615 hours. East of Saint-André-de-Allure, France. Morning fog covered the wheat fields in pale bands of white. The air felt cold and still near the tree line, but small gusts shifted every few minutes across the open ground. Mortar crews knew those gusts would change again the moment shells left the tubes. The Western Front had entered another period of heavy fighting. German infantry pushed hard to delay Allied advances, and every bombardment had to land with precision. Missed rounds meant wasted ammunition and exposed infantry. Accuracy had become the difference between holding a line and losing another platoon. Private Thomas Miller moved across the mortar pit with a quiet focus that stood out among the tired men. He was 28 years old. Before the war he had worked as a chimney sweep and bricklayer in an industrial town filled with narrow alleys, tall furnace stacks, and old houses with cramped fire channels. He had spent years studying how smoke traveled through tight spaces. He understood how air bent through cracks, holes, and vents. He knew how heat pulled smoke upward. He learned how cold air created pockets of pressure that forced soot to sit still in unexpected corners. His work taught patience and observation. It also taught him that airflow rarely behaved the way people expected. That knowledge stayed with him when he joined the army. Most soldiers saw wind as a general direction. Miller saw it as a local force that changed every few meters. Mortar crews never had the luxury of waiting for perfect weather. They fought in whatever conditions the battlefield gave them. The standard method relied on large-scale estimates. Officers checked wind flags behind the line or relied on the feel of air across the face. Mortar tables offered corrections, but those numbers failed when wind curled through broken walls, knocked across shattered barns or rolled down small slopes. Every crew complained about drift. Every crew lost accuracy. Their frustration grew with every mission. The unit had lost 2 men last week when a set of rounds landed short. The crew blamed shifting wind. The officer blamed stress. Miller watched the smoke trails and saw something the others missed. The wind behind the mortar pit moved one way. The wind out in the wheat field moved another. Those small differences changed trajectories by dozens of meters. Miller knew he could not change the battlefield. He also knew he could measure the air if he could isolate a small section of it. He thought of the vents he cleaned back home. He remembered how soot drifted in predictable lines inside a narrow column even when the outside air whipped across roofs. He began experimenting in the quiet hours before dawn. At first he used a broken pipe. The diameter was too wide. Smoke scattered. Then he tried a short wooden tube pulled from a damaged crate. It burned at the edges. He needed something durable, narrow, and heavy enough to stay still. He spent time near the ruins of a farmhouse that had taken artillery fire. A chimney had collapsed. Bricks were scattered across the ground. One piece had a hole running through it from a damaged fuse channel. The opening was round and smooth. The size was perfect. Miller picked it up and studied it. The weight gave it stability. The shape protected the inside from random gusts. He realized it could work as a protected airflow channel. He cleaned the soot out, set it on a small metal plate and tested it with a lit match. He watched the smoke rise through the tube. The smoke leaned to the right. He shifted the brick a few inches. The smoke leaned left. He shifted again. The smoke rose straight. The tube had created a stable pocket of air that reacted only to the immediate wind at that specific location. Miller repeated the test. The results were consistent. This gave him a direct, local reading that matched the trajectory path of their mortar fire. It was the closest thing he had ever seen to a zero-wind measurement under battlefield conditions. He set the brick beside the mortar site. His sergeant noticed and frowned. Tools not listed in manuals often raised questions. Miller explained the idea. The sergeant listened, then shrugged. He said the officers would not approve something that looked improvised. Regulations were strict. Anything unofficial was a distraction. Miller kept the brick anyway. He tested it before every mission even when the others ignored him. The next fire mission came at midday. Clouds rolled above the fields and wind shifted at irregular intervals. The crew received coordinates to hit a small German strongpoint hidden behind a line of hedges. Distance was moderate. Conditions were difficult. Their first volley landed wide. The sergeant swore under his breath. The second volley drifted again. Officers blamed rushed calculations. Miller checked the brick. Smoke drifted a few degrees more than the crew expected. He gave a correction. The sergeant waved him off. Doctrine said to follow tables, not a brick. The crew fired again. Another miss. The Germans fired back with machine guns and mortars. Dirt exploded across the pit. Men yelled for faster adjustments. The officer demanded accuracy. Miller checked the brick a second time. The smoke leaned left in a steady line. He gave another correction. This time the sergeant listened. The next round hit close. The one after struck the hedge itself. A plume of black smoke rose. The officer stared at the brick, annoyed that it worked. Word spread among nearby crews. Some mocked the device. Others asked to see it. Miller spent evenings shaping more tubes from other chimney fragments. Each one gave stable readings when positioned correctly. The method was not official, but men cared more about results than rules. Crews used it quietly. Officers tried to discourage it. Miller continued improving the design. He added a thin metal plate with a notch for alignment. He measured angles by marking the brick edges with charcoal. He kept notes in a small booklet about drift under different climates. He built a system without calling it one. The next major test came soon. German activity increased at night. Patrols probed the Allied line. Artillery teams shifted positions. Command expected a strong push at dawn. June 24, 1944. 0440 hours. A thin gray light crept across the fields east of the village. Shapes moved in the mist. Allied listening posts reported scattered German activity throughout the night. Tracks and boots crushed the wet ground beyond the hedges. Radio traffic suggested a coordinated assault would begin soon. Mortar crews prepared for rapid-fire missions. Ammunition handlers stacked crates in neat rows. Everyone felt the pressure. The line had weakened after several days of heavy contact. Miller checked his brick tube again. He set it on the steel plate he fashioned the night before. He lit a match and watched the smoke rise. The smoke leaned slightly left. The air near the mortar pit moved differently than it had during the previous day. He tested again. The result stayed the same. He recorded the angle on the small page he kept folded in his breast pocket. The sergeant looked over with mild interest. His attitude had shifted after their last accurate strike. He no longer dismissed the tool. He still kept quiet about it around officers. He knew they disliked anything that sat outside manuals. He asked Miller for the reading. Miller gave the correction. The sergeant nodded and passed the adjustment to the site. Gunner. By 0455 hours, distant engines rumbled from the east. German units began their advance with caution. They expected Allied resistance. Recon elements probed the line first. Mortar crews listened to the distant bursts of rifles. Allied infantry sent short radio calls requesting immediate support. The enemy pushed closer with each minute. At 0510 hours, the first fire mission came through. The target was a group of German infantry gathering near a fallen barn. Range was moderate. Terrain was flat enough for good observation. The problem remained the wind. Cross currents shifted between the hedges. Smoke signals from the front line drifted unpredictably. The crew loaded the first round. The tube thumped. The shell arced into the morning haze. It landed short by a wide margin. The sergeant looked at the map, then at the officer. The officer insisted on standard corrections. The second round drifted even farther off course. The frustration grew. Men braced for incoming counter-fire. Miller checked the brick tube again. The smoke leaned at a sharper angle than before. A new gust pattern moved across the pit. He told the sergeant the correction. It was a larger change than normal. The sergeant hesitated. The officer stepped closer and asked what Miller was doing. The sergeant claimed he was cross-checking drift readings. The officer frowned. He did not want unauthorized methods in the middle of a battle. Miller stayed silent. The sergeant trusted Miller's readings despite the officer's discomfort. He ordered the new correction. The crew prepared another round. They fired. The shell landed near the barn. The follow-up round hit the center of the target area. The officer stared at the brick in disbelief. He said nothing. He only gave the order to continue firing. German infantry scattered behind the broken structure. Mortar fire forced them to crawl through narrow trenches. Some abandoned the position. Others held until another volley landed. The attack slowed. By 0535 hours, new reports arrived. Enemy units regrouped and prepared a larger push. Mortar crews needed consistent accuracy to shape the battlefield. Miller adjusted the brick tube again. He measured the lean of the smoke with careful focus. He used a small stick with charcoal marks to estimate angles. He recorded the change. He handed the sergeant a refined correction number. The enemy now brought machine guns forward. Their fire rattled across the line. Allied infantry stayed pinned behind low dirt mounds. Mortar teams worked at full speed. Each round required accuracy. A cluster of German troops moved along a shallow ditch. They planned to flank the line. The officer ordered a barrage. He gave the coordinates. Miller watched the brick tube again. The smoke showed a new shift. The sergeant followed Miller's reading instead of the officer's wind estimate. They fired. The first round landed directly on the ditch. The second and third rounds hit along the same path. The advancing group broke apart. Survivors crawled back toward the hedge line. The officer said nothing, but his expression revealed a quiet acceptance. Miller's method spread within the platoon that morning. Other crews asked him to test their positions. He carried his brick tube from pit to pit. He gave readings to each team. The officers could not block this movement. They saw the results. The crews fired tighter patterns. The sound of accurate impacts rolled across the fields. The German assault reached its critical point at 0615 hours. A larger infantry column supported by light vehicles advanced through a wide corridor between two hedges. Allied riflemen struggled to slow them. Machine gun teams ran low on ammunition. Mortar fire needed to stop the push. The coordinates came fast. The crew had to adjust constantly. Miller checked the tube again. Smoke leaned sharply. A strong crosswind swept across the open corridor. Mortar tables did not account for these narrow gust channels. Miller called for a heavy correction. The sergeant passed it along. The crew fired. The first round struck near the lead group. The second round hit the cluster of troops behind them. The third round landed in the center of the corridor. The column stalled. Men dove for cover. A fourth round detonated near the rear element. The mortar pit kept firing. The officer watched with a mix of disbelief and relief. The enemy broke formation. They attempted to fall back. Some vehicles reversed into the hedges. The assault slowed. Allied infantry regained confidence. They pushed forward in small groups. Machine gun teams returned fire. Mortar crews continued to hit retreating targets with accuracy far above their usual performance. The officer approached Miller. He looked at the brick tube. He asked how it worked. Miller gave a simple explanation. He said the tube shielded a small section of air. He said smoke inside it revealed the exact drift at that location. He did not use complex terms. He kept it plain. The officer listened without interrupting. He nodded once, then walked away without giving approval or disapproval. The men knew they had survived the morning because of consistent fire. They also knew the brick tube had guided every adjustment. No one spoke openly about it. They did not want attention from higher command. They only cared that the method kept them alive. The rest of the morning involved scattered engagements. Mortar crews fired in short bursts. German units pulled back to reorganize. Allied lines held firm. Miller collected his brick tube and returned to his pit. He examined the soot at the opening. He cleaned it with a cloth. He checked the alignment marks. He closed his booklet. He understood something important. Wind would always be a problem. Doctrine could never solve it. Practical innovation could. This idea would face more resistance soon. The afternoon quiet did not last. Reports of German regrouping spread through the line. Officers expected another push before sunset. Mortar teams cleaned tubes and checked fuses. Ammunition handlers stacked crates under cover. Everyone moved with steady urgency. The morning assault showed how close the line had come to breaking. The men felt the need to prepare for another clash. Miller kept working on his brick tube. He adjusted the alignment plate. He carved small reference marks into the metal surface. He checked the interior with a small strip of paper to remove soot. The sergeant watched from a short distance. He no longer questioned the tool. He did not mention it to officers either. He knew the value of quiet results. The officer returned later. His tone carried curiosity and caution. He asked Miller to demonstrate the tube again. Miller placed it on the plate and lit a match. Smoke drifted at a slight angle. He explained how the brick shielded the interior air. He said the channel allowed smoke to show a precise direction. The officer asked how Miller knew it worked. Miller described the way soot behaved inside chimneys and vents. He explained that narrow channels stabilized airflow. The officer nodded slowly. He did not praise the idea. He did not reject it either. He only said that accuracy was critical and walked away. At 1620 hours, fresh reconnaissance confirmed movement from the east. The Germans advanced with caution. They sent small patrols along hedgerows. They used shadows for concealment. Allied infantry stayed alert behind their positions. Machine gun teams checked their belts. Mortar crews stood ready. Everyone waited for the main. By 1700 hours, sound carried through the fields. German vehicles rumbled behind distant tree lines. Shouts echoed from unseen positions. Allied radio operators called for standby fire missions. The tension grew. Men steadied their hands. The sky dimmed under heavy clouds. The first request for fire arrived at 1712 hours. Enemy infantry attempted to move along a sunken road. The position offered cover. They planned to reach a small hill that overlooked the Allied line. If they secured that ground, they could direct machine gun fire on exposed trenches. Mortar crews had to stop the approach. The officer gave coordinates. The sergeant prepared the site. The crew loaded the first round. Miller checked the brick tube. The smoke leaned sharply to the right. The gusts came in bursts. If the crew used standard corrections, the rounds would drift wide. Miller calculated a larger adjustment. He told the sergeant. The sergeant looked at the officer. The officer hesitated. He had to make a decision quickly. He approved Miller's correction. The crew fired. The round arced and exploded along the edge of the sunken road. Enemy forces scattered. The next 2 rounds landed in the center. Dust and debris rose from the impact. Allied observers reported direct hits. The sergeant kept the same correction for the next volley. The crew fired again. The enemy abandoned the position and moved back behind the hedges. More requests came within minutes. German units shifted to attack another sector. They tried to exploit a gap between 2 companies. Allied infantry requested immediate mortar support. The coordinates changed fast. Miller checked the brick tube again. Wind shifted near the pit. The smoke leaned left this time. He recorded the new angle and gave a fresh correction. The sergeant trusted Miller without hesitation. The officer watched closely. The crew fired. Each round landed near the intended target. The scattered pattern tightened with each adjustment. The officer could not deny the results. The method worked in real time under unpredictable conditions. By 1745 hours, the Germans increased their pressure. Infantry groups pushed through narrow paths. Mortar teams needed to hit those paths before the enemy infiltrated the line. Miller checked the tube again. He noted severe fluctuations. Wind moved in waves across the open ground. The brick tube gave the only stable reading. He gave another correction. The crew fired. This volley broke a group of German riflemen attempting to move along a shallow ditch. Observers confirmed the rounds hit the exact center of the formation. The attack failed. Survivors retreated. Allied infantry advanced slightly to regain ground. The officer approached the pit again. He asked Miller about the tube's range of usefulness. Miller explained that the tube only read drift at the mortar's location. He said distant gusts still mattered, but the start of the trajectory needed stability. He added that accurate initial drift improved the entire arc of the shell. The officer listened with cautious interest. By 1805 hours, the battlefield shifted again. German artillery began probing fire. Shells landed near the mortar pits. Crews ducked behind sandbags. Dirt scattered in violent bursts. The men refused to leave their positions. They knew the line depended on their accuracy. Miller stayed by his tube. He tested the airflow every few minutes. At 1822 hours, the largest German assault of the day began. Dozens of infantry pushed forward in wide staggered formation. Light vehicles moved behind them. Machine gun teams advanced close to the front. The attack targeted the center of the Allied line. If it broke, the entire position would fall apart. Mortar crews received priority targets at once. They had to fire rapidly and accurately. The enemy advanced behind a line of smoke grenades. Visibility dropped. The brick tube became even more important. Miller tested it. Smoke inside the tube leaned at a consistent angle. He delivered the correction. The crew fired. The first volley landed behind the smoke curtain. Radio operators confirmed direct impact on an advancing squad. The second volley struck a group of machine gunners moving near a low ridge. The third volley detonated near a light vehicle. The enemy slowed their advance. The pressure on Allied infantry eased. The Germans pushed with renewed force after regrouping. More troops ran through the smoke. Mortar crews had seconds to adjust. Miller checked the tube again. The wind shifted back toward the east. He gave a new correction. The sergeant applied it without pause. The next volley hit the center of the advancing line. The shock of impact caused the enemy to scatter. Machine gun fire from the Allied side increased. Mortar crews continued firing. The officer allowed Miller to manage wind adjustments entirely. He did not argue. He did not question. He saw no alternative. The battle dragged into the late evening. Mortar tubes grew hot. Crews rotated positions to avoid burns. Ammunition handlers worked with precision. Wind conditions changed dozens of times. Miller monitored the tube through each shift. The sergeant relayed corrections. Each set of rounds landed with tight accuracy. By 1930 hours, the German assault collapsed. Survivors retreated into the tree line. Allied forces secured the ground. The line held. Mortar crews sat in silence for a moment. The weight of the day settled on them. They knew the difference their accuracy had made. They knew the brick tube ensured that accuracy. The officer approached Miller with a calm voice. He said the method worked. He said it saved lives. He also said higher command would resist anything unofficial. He told Miller to keep the tube but stay discreet. He walked away without further comment. The men gathered around the pit. They looked at the brick tube. They understood its value. They also understood the danger of unwanted attention. Miller cleaned it carefully. He stored it in a small box lined with cloth. He closed the lid. He knew the next days of fighting would test the method again. Night settled across the fields. The men prepared for another long cycle of waiting. Night brought a short period of calm. The field stayed quiet except for distant artillery. Mortar crews slept in shifts. The officer walked the line with a tense expression. He understood the position remained fragile. German regrouping often came after nightfall. New attacks could strike before dawn. He needed every mortar crew ready. Miller sat beside the pit with his small box. Inside it, the brick tube rested in folded cloth. He removed it and checked the interior again. Soot built up from repeated use. He cleaned it with slow care. The sergeant approached and sat beside him. He asked if the tube had limits. Miller said the tool needed a stable base and a clear channel. He said it worked best in mixed wind conditions where outside gusts created confusion. The sergeant nodded and said the tool gave them an advantage that standard doctrine never gave. The officer returned later. He carried a notebook with rough sketches of the day's fire missions. He asked Miller to explain each adjustment. Miller described every smoke drift and correction. The officer listened, writing only short notes. He seemed interested but cautious. He said higher command might investigate unofficial methods if they noticed the sudden increase in accuracy. He warned Miller to avoid attracting attention. Then he walked away. By midnight, radio intercepts would review the matter. He gave no praise. He gave no approval. He left without offering any guidance. The crew watched him walk away with a sense of unease. The officer looked at Miller and said the truth. He said command preferred doctrine over innovation. He warned that credit rarely went to the right people. He also said the tube worked and that mattered more to the men who depended on it. Miller nodded. He accepted the reality without complaint. By midday, the battalion advanced toward a long ridge overlooking a major road. German units defended the slope with machine guns and mortars. The attack required precise support fire. Mortar crews moved into position. Miller set the brick tube beside the site and checked the drift. The smoke leaned slightly right. He recorded the reading and gave the correction. The sergeant aligned the sight. The officer approved. The first volley hit a German machine gun nest behind a stack of broken beams. Riflemen surged forward. The enemy responded with scattered mortar fire. One round landed close to the crew, blasting dirt across the pit. Men stayed low but kept working. Miller checked the tube again. Wind shifted back toward center. He adjusted the correction. The next volley hit a defensive position near a stone outcrop. The enemy retreated toward a shallow trench. Allied infantry advanced another 50 meters. Mortar support continued with tight accuracy. By 1410 hours, German resistance hardened near the crest of the ridge. Their fire intensified. Allied infantry struggled to move. Mortar crews needed to break the strongpoint. The officer relayed urgent coordinates. Miller checked the tube. A sudden gust pushed smoke horizontally inside the channel. He estimated the exact angle and gave a heavy correction. The sergeant trusted the reading. The crew fired. The first round landed directly inside a fortified position. The second round hit a group of riflemen preparing to counterattack. The third round struck the edge of the trench. Enemy fire weakened. Allied troops pushed up the slope. The ridge fell by 1500 hours. Mortar crews gathered at the crest. They stared at the valley below, now quiet. The officer congratulated them for their accuracy. He gave Miller a brief nod that carried respect without ceremony. The men sat together and rested. That evening, the battalion commander visited the ridge. He spoke with the officer and reviewed maps. He asked about the mortar effectiveness. He heard brief explanations. When he approached Miller, he kept his tone neutral. He asked about the device again. Miller demonstrated it without embellishment. The commander observed the smoke drift inside the tube. He studied the angle. He asked if the tool created problems. Miller said it only improved accuracy. The commander accepted the explanation but made no promises. He said tools without formal approval often caused administrative issues. He said results mattered, but procedures also mattered. He told Miller to continue using it quietly. He left the ridge with a measured stride. The war pushed forward. The battalion continued its advance. Miller's method spread through nearby units. Some crews built their own versions with slight variations. They used pipe sections, carved wooden tubes, or shaped stone pieces. The principle stayed the same. Create a stable airflow channel. Read the drift. Adjust the shot. Higher command never issued an official directive about the technique. They neither endorsed it nor banned it. They allowed it to survive in silence. Only soldiers on the line cared about its true value. They understood that battlefield reality demanded practical solutions. Weeks later, as the battalion pushed deeper into France, Miller received a short commendation for consistent performance. The document praised his reliability and contribution to fire accuracy. It did not mention his tool. It did not mention his innovation. He accepted the commendation with a quiet nod. Recognition mattered little to him. Survival mattered more. By autumn, the original brick tube bore scars from constant use. Its edges chipped. Soot darkened the interior. Miller cleaned it each night. He carried it through villages, forests, and open fields. He used it during dozens of fire missions. Each mission confirmed the same truth. Small innovations could shape entire battles. Discipline mattered, but observation mattered more. The men who served with Miller never forgot the tool. They spoke of it long after the fighting ended. They said the tube guided fire when nothing else worked. They said it saved lives during the hardest days. They said it brought order to a battlefield shaped by chaos. After the war, Miller returned home. He resumed work as a chimney sweep and bricklayer. He carried no medals of note. He lived a quiet life. When neighbors asked about his service, he offered simple answers. He said he worked in a mortar crew. He never described the tool. He never asked for praise. He never claimed he changed anything. But the men who fought beside him remembered. They recalled how one quiet soldier carried a piece of chimney brick into battle and used it to see the wind clearly. They recalled how that brick created zero wind fire during the worst days of the campaign. They remembered how his idea traveled through units even when command refused to acknowledge it. Miller kept the original tube on a small shelf in his workshop. He cleaned it once a year. He never used it again. It stayed there as a silent reminder of the days when a simple idea shaped survival on the Western Front. His story stayed known only through the men who witnessed it. They told it as a piece of forgotten history. A soldier's tool. A practical innovation. A quiet act that changed the course of battles without ever being written into manuals. The principle was the same. He noted how the narrowest interior channel stabilized the smoke. He took mental measurements. This confirmed his method would work even in complex environments. Word of his tool spread slowly across nearby mortar crews. Some men asked to see it. Others asked for instructions. Miller showed them how to angle the tube, how to align it with their sights, and how to confirm drift by repeating the test. He kept the method simple. He avoided complex explanations. The men understood. They needed stable readings. The tube gave them that. The officer eventually received questions from other units. He kept his answers brief. He said the method improved consistency. He avoided mentioning Miller by name. He wanted to protect him from unnecessary scrutiny. He understood how higher command reacted to non-standard innovation. They often treated it as a challenge to doctrine instead of a practical solution. At 0730 hours the next day, the battalion prepared to advance through a narrow town center. German forces held defensive positions behind rubble. Machine guns covered the main street. Mortar support had to be precise to open the route. Any drift would place shells too close to Allied infantry. Miller set up the brick tube beside the new mortar position. The smoke leaned sharply at first, then leveled inside the channel. He recorded the angle. The sergeant took the correction and aligned the sight. The crew fired the first round. It struck a machine gun nest behind a collapsed storefront. Riflemen advanced into the opening. The enemy responded with counter-fire. Small arms and mortars rained across the street. Miller checked the brick tube again. The airflow changed instantly when a gust slipped between two damaged buildings. Standard methods could not track such shifts. The tube tracked them with ease. He delivered a new correction. The next volley hit a German squad attempting to move between buildings. Debris filled the air. Survivors fell back under cover. Allied infantry advanced further. The officer saw the accuracy again. He gave Miller direct authority over wind adjustments for the entire operation. He trusted the tool more than the outdated tables. The battalion pushed street by street. Each section required carefully timed barrages. German positions shifted frequently. Miller tested the tube more than 30 times during the advance. The smoke inside the channel revealed every small change. Mortar rounds landed inside alleys, across rooftops, and behind improvised barricades. The enemy suffered heavy losses. Their defensive line broke. By late afternoon, the town center fell to Allied control. Mortar crews gathered around Miller. They asked how he built the device. They wanted instructions. They wanted copies. Miller explained the steps clearly. He said they needed a stable brick piece with a clean channel, a flat plate, and charcoal marks for angle reference. He did not ask for credit. He only cared that the method worked. The officer watched the conversations with mixed concern. He knew the tool would spread beyond their battalion soon. He also knew that higher officers could either recognize its value or punish the men for altering doctrine. He approached Miller and told him to stay cautious. He said some officers disliked any tool not listed in manuals. He warned that success did not protect a soldier from criticism. Later that night, a major from another unit visited the mortar position. He had heard about the sudden accuracy. He asked to see the brick tube. The officer hesitated but agreed. Miller presented the tool with steady hands. The major inspected it, turning it over with interest. He asked Miller to demonstrate its use. Miller lit a match and showed the drift. The major raised an eyebrow. He seemed impressed, but his expression hardened after a moment. He asked if this device had approval from higher command. The officer answered honestly. No official approval existed. The major closed the box and said doctrine mattered. He left without further comment. The officer looked uneasy. He told Miller not to let the wrong people handle the tube. He said innovation often survived only because officers ignored it. He added that the major's reaction could cause problems. Miller stayed quiet. He knew the tool worked. He also knew military systems resisted ideas that came from ordinary soldiers. The next 2 days involved heavy movement north. Mortar crews operated in wide fields again. Wind returned to open patterns. Miller tested the tube each time. It continued to deliver stable readings. Crews refined their corrections quickly. Accuracy stayed high. At 1,420 hours on the third day, German forces launched a strong counterattack from an elevated ridge. Their fire pinned Allied riflemen. Mortar crews received urgent coordinates. The officer asked Miller for a drift reading before the first volley. Miller tested the tube. Smoke leaned faster than expected. Strong gusts moved through the valley. He gave a heavy correction. The crew fired. The first rounds landed near the ridge. The next volley hit a concentration of enemy troops behind a rock line. Allies regained pressure. Machine guns resumed firing. The officer kept Miller at the center of every adjustment. The battle turned in their favor. By 1600 hours, the enemy retreated. Allied forces secured the ridge. Mortar crews rested with quiet pride. They knew their accuracy shaped the outcome. They also knew the brick tube had guided every shot. That evening, a courier arrived from battalion command. He carried a short written note. It ordered officers to submit reports about unusual devices used in recent engagements. The officer read the note slowly. He glanced at Miller, then folded the paper. He said nothing about it. He told the men to prepare for another day. Miller understood the meaning. Their results had drawn attention. More attention than he wanted. The next morning opened with a low haze rolling across the valley. German artillery struck the far slopes with scattered shells, but the fire lacked coordination. Allied units prepared to advance. Mortar crews cleaned their tubes and checked their gear. Miller inspected the brick tube a final time. He studied the channel for cracks. The tool remained intact. The officer approached with a guarded expression. He said battalion command wanted an explanation for the recent accuracy spike. He said they asked about Miller's involvement. He told Miller to be careful with his answers. He added that command often reacted poorly to tools not listed in manuals. He walked away without further advice. At 0920 hours, a staff officer from battalion headquarters arrived. He wore a clean uniform that contrasted sharply with the dust-covered mortar crews. He carried a clipboard. His voice stayed calm but cold. He asked who made the adjustments that produced such consistent fire. The officer pointed toward Miller. The staff officer studied him for a moment. He asked about the device. Miller presented the brick tube with steady hands. The staff officer inspected it without expression. He asked why a soldier would create such an item without authorization. Miller explained that battlefield wind shifted constantly. He said standard corrections failed in complex terrain. He said the tube measured drift at the exact mortar position. He kept his language simple. He avoided technical claims. He only described what he saw. The staff officer wrote several notes and closed his clipboard. He said command would review the matter. He gave no praise. He gave no approval. He left without offering any guidance. The crew watched him walk away with a sense of unease. The officer looked at Miller and said the truth. He said command preferred doctrine over innovation. He warned that credit rarely went to the right people. He also said the tube worked and that mattered more to the men who depended on it. Miller nodded. He accepted the reality without complaint. By midday, the battalion advanced toward a long ridge overlooking a major road. German units defended the slope with machine guns and mortars. The attack required precise support fire. Mortar crews moved into position. Miller set the brick tube beside the sight and checked the drift. The smoke leaned slightly right. He recorded the reading and gave the correction. The sergeant aligned the sight. The officer approved. The first volley hit a German machine gun nest behind a stack of broken beams. Riflemen surged forward. The enemy responded with scattered mortar fire. One round landed close to the crew, blasting dirt across the pit. Men stayed low but kept working. Miller checked the tube again. Wind shifted back toward center. He adjusted the correction. The next volley hit a defensive position near a stone outcrop. The enemy retreated toward a shallow trench. Allied infantry advanced another 50 meters. Mortar support continued with tight accuracy. By 1410 hours, German resistance hardened near the crest of the ridge. Their fire intensified. Allied infantry struggled to move. Mortar crews needed to break the strongpoint. The officer relayed urgent coordinates. Miller checked the tube. A sudden gust pushed smoke horizontally inside the channel. He estimated the exact angle and gave a heavy correction. The sergeant trusted the reading. The crew fired. The first round landed directly inside a fortified position. The second round hit a group of riflemen preparing to counterattack. The third round struck the edge of the trench. Enemy fire weakened. Allied troops pushed up the slope. The ridge fell by 1500 hours. Mortar crews gathered at the crest. They stared at the valley below, now quiet. The officer congratulated them for their accuracy. He gave Miller a brief nod that carried respect without ceremony. The men sat together and rested. That evening, the battalion commander visited the ridge. He spoke with the officer and reviewed maps. He asked about the mortar effectiveness. He heard brief explanations. When he approached Miller, he kept his tone neutral. He asked about the device again. Miller demonstrated it without embellishment. The commander observed the smoke drift inside the tube. He studied the angle. He asked if the tool created problems. Miller said it only improved accuracy. The commander accepted the explanation but made no promises. He said tools without formal approval often caused administrative issues. He said results mattered but procedures also mattered. He told Miller to continue using it quietly. He left the ridge with a measured stride. The war pushed forward. The battalion continued its advance. Miller's method spread through nearby units. Some crews built their own versions with slight variations. They used pipe sections, carved wooden tubes, or shaped stone pieces. The principle stayed the same. Create a stable airflow channel. Read the drift. Adjust the shot. Higher command never issued an official directive about the technique. They neither endorsed it nor banned it. They allowed it to survive in silence. Only soldiers on the line cared about its true value. They understood that battlefield reality demanded practical solutions. Weeks later, as the battalion pushed deeper into France, Miller received a short commendation for consistent performance. The document praised his reliability and contribution to fire accuracy. It did not mention his tool. It did not mention his innovation. He accepted the commendation with a quiet nod. Recognition mattered little to him. Survival mattered more. By autumn, the original brick tube bore scars from constant use. Its edges chipped. Soot darkened the interior. Miller cleaned it each night. He carried it through villages, forests, and open fields. He used it during dozens of fire missions. Each mission confirmed the same truth. Small innovations could shape entire battles. Discipline mattered, but observation mattered more. The men who served with Miller never forgot the tool. They spoke of it long after the fighting ended. They said the tube guided fire when nothing else worked. They said it saved lives during the hardest days. They said it brought order to a battlefield shaped by chaos. After the war, Miller returned home. He resumed work as a chimney sweep and bricklayer. He carried no medals of note. He lived a quiet life. When neighbors asked about his service, he offered simple answers. He said he worked in a mortar crew. He never described the tool. He never asked for praise. He never claimed he changed anything. But the men who fought beside him remembered. They recalled how one quiet soldier carried a piece of chimney brick into battle and used it to see the wind clearly. They recalled how that brick created zero wind fire during the worst days of the campaign. They remembered how his idea traveled through units even when command refused to acknowledge it. Miller kept the original tube on a small shelf in his workshop. He cleaned it once a year. He never used it again. It stayed there as a silent reminder of the days when a simple idea shaped survival on the Western Front. His story stayed known only through the men who witnessed it. They told it as a piece of forgotten history. A soldier's tool. A practical innovation. A quiet act that changed the course of battles without ever being written into manuals.